Braving a perilous journey by sea, but who's taking responsibility for migrants seeking sanctuary from the chaos and carnage in their homeland? And does providing a safety net encourage more to risk their lives trying to get to Europe? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Mike Hanna. It's a dangerous gamble driven by desperation, a journey with no certainty of success, and one that carries with it the serious risk of death. The harsh reality for the many thousands of migrants fleeing conflict, violence and instability in their home countries, heading for Europe. The route many are taking is from North Africa to Italy, escaping wars in Iraq and Syria, poverty and unrest in the Horn of Africa and West Africa, and chaos in Libya and Egypt. Italy launched a search and rescue operations off its shores last November, named Mare Nostrum, or Our Sea in Latin. It followed the deaths of more than 400 migrants when 2 boats capsized off Lampedusa, Italy's southernmost island. The operation has been credited with saving the lives of thousands of men, women and children. But critics argue the perceived safety net is encouraging more migrants to make the dangerous Mediterranean Sea crossing. In 2011, 62,000 migrants arrived in Italy by sea, driven in part by the uprising in Libya. More than 2,000 died making the journey that year. 2012, the number of migrants arriving dropped to a little over 13,000, with 600 dying along the way. A year later, the figure had risen to 42,000 and 700 respectively. But this year, since Operation Mare Nostrum was launched, the number of migrants landing in Italy soared to 139,000, with more than 3,000 losing their lives. Italy is now winding down Mare Nostrum, and funding is being withdrawn. From Saturday, a European Union force will bolster the operation, carrying out a more limited border security mandate. Operation Triton will be run by the EU border agency Frontex. In both cases, it is said rescues at sea will still take place, but the change of focus is raising concerns that migrants may be at greater risk as numbers continue to rise and resources to rescue them are scaled back.
A round of applause for yet another successful rescue. On Friday, 250 Syrian and Palestinian migrants were brought to safety. They are among 150,000 people saved by the Italian Navy since Operation Mare Nostrum started 1 year ago. But now help could come to an end. Italy's Interior Minister announced that Friday is the operation's last day. But for the Navy, it's still business as usual.
At the moment, we haven't received any orders, so at the moment I can tell you that we still have ships down there saving lives, so nothing changes today.
Many among the migrants who were saved in the past year knew that there were warships like this one out there looking for them. Now the fear is that if this operation ends suddenly, others who will attempt a life-threatening crossing of the Mediterranean will be waiting for help that may never come.
Omar Damir and his family were among those brought to safety on Friday. He says news about the end of the rescue operation traveled fast.
Yes, I know that, yes. Everyone knows that Italian ships go over the sea to catch refugees like us, yes. So we are lucky men and women to be here at the end day.
The end of Mare Nostrum coincides with the start of Triton, a border security operation run by the EU's border agency. But humanitarian organizations warn that one operation doesn't replace the other.
From tomorrow, migrants will continue to cross the Mediterranean and nobody will be there to rescue them. Triton will patrol only a third of the area that Mare Nostrum covered.
While the government decides how and when to end its rescue operation, thousands of migrants are expected to try to reach Italy, hoping that someone comes to their help.
And with us now to discuss more, From Geneva, Leonard Doyle, who's with the International Organization for Migration. In London is Ben Ward, Deputy Director of Human Rights Watch Europe. And completing the panel from Warsaw is Ewa Moncure. She's a spokesperson with Frontex, the European Union's border control agency. Welcome to you all. Well, let's begin with Leonard Doyle in Geneva. What does this all mean? Are would-be migrants getting less protection at sea now or not?
Well, it's hard to say. Obviously, there's an attempt to dissuade migrants from crossing by saying there's going to be less protection for them. But at the same time, as you've heard in your own report, the Italian Navy continues to do its patrolling and its humanitarian rescue mission, as we expect them to continue doing.
Ben Ward, your view?
Well, we very much hope Italy will continue, despite the fact that the other European Union member states haven't answered its call to join its humanitarian rescue operation.
Well, Ewa Moncure, let's bring up the point that was highlighted, is that Frontex is running what is essentially a borders security operation as opposed to any form of search and rescue operation. Is that the correct interpretation?
Strictly speaking, yes, we are a border agency and we support member states at their external borders with our assets. However, in maritime operations, search and rescue is performed. We participate in search and rescue all the time.
Well, Ben Ward, you brought up that issue of, well, the money wasn't there. The EU did not back what has been a consistent Italian call in recent months for greater resources to be allocated for the EU to take over some of the functions that it has been operating on its own basis since that tragedy that occurred at Lampedusa. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, of course, Triton is better than nothing, but it will only operate in Italian waters. It's much more limited in scope, and of course, it's a different mandate. It's not a humanitarian mandate. So we don't think it's an adequate replacement for Mare Nostrum.
Leonard Doyle, there appear to be a number of arguments, some would say justifications for the shift in emphasis. And one of the arguments is the pull factor, which a lot of EU politicians have been talking about, that security at sea in some way enticed more refugees to take to the waters at the risk of losing their lives. How much of an argument has this played in terms of the decisions that have been taken now?
Well, it sounds like it's informed the decision, but whether it's correct is another question. I mean, what we see is that the numbers of people crossing and their ethnic background, their national background, changes. So, for example, after the conflict in Gaza, we found predominantly Palestinians on the boat. Now, why, if the pull factor was so attractive, one would have expected Palestinians to be on the boats in spring, but they weren't. We had Eritreans, we had people from Libya. But suddenly, after the conflict in Gaza, the boats were full of Palestinians. That would indicate, I think, that it's really a push factor that's taking people to flee, usually out of desperation.
Well, I want to return to that issue in a moment, but Ewa Moncure, I just want to clarify exactly what is the area of operations of Frontex going to be. Is the case now that there will be less expanses of sea covered now that it is focusing on border security rather than any form of search and rescue?
The operational area of Operation Triton is going to be south of the Italian shoreline, south and east of the Italian shoreline. However, it will go into search and rescue areas of both Italy and Malta.
Well, Ben Ward, it does seem that nobody's quite clear on it here. It may go into some areas, that sometimes it might not. What we do still have, according to everybody, is a basic maritime principle, and that is those who fall in danger on the sea are going to be rescued. Does that at least remain in place, despite the slight confusion over what is exactly happening?
Well, of course it does, and no one is suggesting that any Frontex or any other European vessel would not come to the aid of a migrant boat they encounter in distress. but obviously the kind of assets which are available to the Frontex mission, the areas in which those vessels are likely to be patrolling, and the mandate and the focus of the Frontex operation are very, very different than Mare Nostrum, and it's highly likely that there will be less protection and fewer rescues as a consequence.
Well, I just want to return to that issue about the push factor, as it is called, and take a look at the example of Britain, its position on the matter. Now, Britain has said that it does not support future search and rescue operations to prevent migrants from drowning, arguing that it encourages more people to risk the dangerous sea crossing. In a statement, Foreign Office Minister Joyce Annerley said, "We understand that by withdrawing this rescue cover, we will be leaving innocent women and children and men to drown who would otherwise have been saved. But eventually," she continues, "word will get around the war-torn communities of Syria and Libya and the other unstable nations of the region that we are indeed leaving innocent children, women and men to drown. And when it does, they will think twice about making the journey. And so, eventually, over time, more lives will be saved." Well, Leonard Doyle, now this particular argument appears to be saying, well, let us let people drown now in order to save more people later. Would that be a correct interpretation?
I think this is what you would call tough love, but there's not really much evidence to suggest that it's going to work. I mean, obviously, they're trying to send us an important signal, and this is a political signal that we're hearing. At the same time, the reality on the ground is that people are being saved. And, you know, all mariners have a duty to save people, whether they're getting political instructions or not. It's part of the law of the sea. They have to do it. But I think one of the issues that we're really not talking about is the numbers of people who are dying. I mean, 3,000 people is not a small number. It's an extraordinary figure. And I think, you know, maybe we should focus a little bit more on what is happening to these people, how badly they're being treated by smugglers who take money from them and then send them to their deaths in rickety boats. The political discussion is interesting, but at the end of the day, it's an attempt to dissuade people by saying there's going to be no lifeguard on duty. But at the end of the day, we know that mariners will be rescuing people.
Well,
after all, the Lampedusa tragedy led to the creation of Mare Nostrum and to the huge humanitarian resources which the Italian government put at the disposal of people and saved, you know, tens of thousands of lives.
Ben Ward, I mean, that type of argument about the push factor that we just heard there outlined, it assumes that there is a decision made by people to go to sea to try and attempt to flee from crises in which they find themselves. Some would argue that the decision is enforced, that people have no option in certain circumstances to take to the waters, risking their lives. It's not because they want to, it is because they are forced to. Now, this type of argument about, well, we should stop this, does appear to devalue to an extent the risk that people are taking and the value of human life itself. Would you agree?
Indeed, it ignores the very strong push factors, as your other guest has said. It also, I think, is completely inconsistent with the values that the European Union is supposed to represent. You know, the European Union spends €1 billion a year on humanitarian assistance around the world. Isn't saving life in the Mediterranean the ultimate expression of that humanitarian commitment? If the European Union is serious about trying to prevent people from making the dangerous crossing, then they ought to, in fact, be giving people the opportunity to apply for asylum in North Africa and other places, and increasing their resettlement places in Europe for refugees. They're not doing either of those things, which really calls into question the commitment that the UK and other governments have in the European Union to the protection and humane treatment of these people.
Well, that is a point to which I will return, but Ewa Moncur, the whole issue of Frontex being a border operation rather than a search and rescue one, which has been said a couple of times, is there a sense that the agency is kind of feeling that it is now the recipient of a political issue being brushed off the table, and economic issue being brushed off the table and handed over to an agency which is not necessarily equipped to maintain search and rescue operations, although it is equipped to do the border controls?
Well, these are certainly political questions that it's not my place to comment, but I can assure you that we have always done, and we're certainly doing so, everything to support the Italian authorities, who ultimately are responsible for coordinating search and rescue, are the international law, with our vessels and our planes in this operation, which will contribute to search and rescue.
Well, I just want to continue, Ewa Moncure. The budget for the operation, 2.9 million euros monthly at this particular point, which covers the deployment of 2 ocean patrol vessels, 2 other boats, 2 aircraft, and a helicopter. Now we are looking at a vast expanse of Mediterranean Sea. These sort of resources, though, of course, incredibly valuable, potentially, are surely not enough as a dedicated operation, are they?
Yes, of course, but we need to understand that Frontex was created to provide additional support to the national authorities. So Operation Triton is what we are offering Italy, what we've discussed with Italy, what would help at this particular time, in this particular situation. Let's not forget, Frontex does not have any own assets. Frontex does not own planes and boats or helicopters. So whenever we organize an operation, we need to turn to member states, ask member states if they can make them available, and then we can go ahead.
Well, Ben Ward, we're returning to something you mentioned a little bit earlier, and that is that the Italians had asked for help and they haven't got help. We are hearing about an operation that is essentially being done in cooperation with other people. The Italians' efforts, they are going to have to carry on, it would be assumed, doing it maybe on a less extent. But we're talking about joint operations still continuing, are we not?
Well, it's really not clear. I mean, I think if you listen to different Italian government officials, you hear different things. The Interior Minister seemed to be very clear that as soon as the Frontex operation was initiated, Mare Nostrum would be discontinued. However, there have been indications this week from the Italian military, from the Defense Secretary, that Mare Nostrum will continue in some fashion, at least for the foreseeable future. So it's not entirely clear. It may be, of course, that the Italian government is looking to see what kind of support Frontex might be able to provide, and maybe sort of calibrating the scale of its operations with that in mind. Obviously, as I said before, in our judgment, it's vital that Mare Nostrum continues, because it simply is the only credible mechanism for saving lives in the Mediterranean right now.
Leonard Doyle, I want to return to that issue that was touched on a few minutes ago, and that is, in the debate about what is happening to would-be migrants at sea, what perhaps is being lost, just in the discussion that we're happening at the moment, is the broader issue about what drives these migrants in the first place, and the broader issue about what should be done with them apart from saving them at sea. Is there the need to actually engage in this debate at greater depth, to discuss, for example, welcome centres, to discuss resettlement centres, and most importantly, to discuss what are the issues that propel people to take such a dangerous journey?
I think certainly. One other issue I think needs to happen is migrants need to be informed as to the grave dangers they take when they embark on these rickety boats and hand a lot of money, $2,000 a time, quite often, over to smugglers. So they need to be better informed as to the risks that they're taking. They may be lured by the bright lights rather than know the risks. They're being pushed by violence, by states falling apart, by civil war. But as we've described a little while ago, the problem in Libya is creating enormous problems. Problem in Syria, Iraq, Palestine, and Gaza. So there are push factors, plenty to be done. Certainly, we need better systems to bring migrants into Europe, because the population of Europe is aging. And if we want to have a healthy economy, we're going to need skilled workers, and migrants certainly provide that. Many of these people who are drowning on these boats are skilled people. They come with backgrounds, well-educated people. So they have a lot to contribute, and there clearly needs to be a better system that's going to help bring them to jobs and new lives in Northern Europe where there's a need.
Well, Ben Ward, you brought it up in the first place. Would you like to expound in terms of what you believe should be done to deal more effectively with this issue?
Well, there are a couple of very concrete things that could be done. The first is the issue of giving people the opportunity to apply for asylum in the Middle East region, in North Africa, so that they don't actually need to get on board rickety boats in order to come to Europe to claim asylum. I think that would make a big difference. It's something that the European Commission has called for. There isn't much enthusiasm for it among EU governments, as far as I can tell. The other issue, is specifically in relation to Syrians, refugees from Syria, is the question of the resettlement of Syrians from neighboring countries in the region to Europe. You know, Europe's record on resettlement of Syrians is extremely poor, with the exception of Germany. There are far more refugees in Turkey, for example, than there are in the entire European Union put together. Europe is really not doing enough. The other thing I think that's important to talk about briefly is the question of root causes. I mean, EU governments are very keen on the question of root causes as something that needs to be a focus of EU migration policy. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong in looking at economic development and improving human rights protection and conflict resolution and so on. But I think we have to recognize that those are very long-term efforts, and they're not going to have much impact on people's flight across the Mediterranean anytime soon. So we really need to look at more practical, immediate solutions.
Well, Ewa Moncu, I don't want to put you in a position here. I understand that you're the spokesperson for an agency, but what Frontex is doing is just part of what is a far, far greater issue. It is dealing with consequences. It is not necessarily dealing with causes, with motivations. Wouldn't your job and the agency's job be a lot easier if it was, if the focus was cause as well as consequence? You are picking up on consequence. You are acting as police officers, essentially. Would it be easier if it was looked at in a wider picture?
Well, you are correct. We are, border control is very visible, but it's only one element of management of migration. I mean, we all talked about today about different push factors, possible pull factors, and well, the agency, the agency's mandate is border control. The agency was created as a solidarity instrument for the member states because we have one border in the Schengen area. So that's the mandate of the agency at the moment.
Ben Ward, to return to the issue about dealing with cause rather than consequence, there is not much debate about it in the EU. You mentioned the fact that there are far more refugees in Turkey than there are in the entire European Union. There are probably more refugees in Jordan at present than there are. Is the need to actually change the thinking within European Union members, which is one of the fundamental ways in which to cut down the horrendous human cost of people trying to get across the water?
Well, look, we certainly have a very negative debate about migration in Europe today, generally, and I think that debate is, has negative effects on a whole range of different policy areas, including the issue of the resettlement of Syrian refugees, including the boat migration issue, including even now the question about the free movement of workers inside the European Union. And it's unfortunate, I think, that when you look at the kinds of kind of common responses, that the policy solutions that the EU leaders come up with together, they tend not to really recognize the importance of the European Union acting in accordance with the values it's supposed to be founded on. Respect for human rights, protection of refugees, and instead you get a focus only on border enforcement, border security, seeing the issue as essentially as a security problem rather than a human problem.
Well, at that particular point, my thanks to our guests, Leonard Doyle, Ben Ward, and Iwa Moncure. And do please add your thoughts to this discussion. You can leave your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. We're also on Twitter at AJ Inside Story is where to find us. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.